I think we're just about ready to get started here. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the third and final webinar in our Cycle of Harm, the Toxic Path of Fracked Gas series, brought to you by Scenic Hudson. I'd like to thank all of our great co-sponsors for tonight's program, the Stop Dan Scammer Coalition, Food and Water Watch, Sierra Club, Clearwater, Riverkeeper, Catskill Mountain Keeper, UACT, the Newburgh Clean Water Project, Orange Wrap, and the New Paltz Climate Action Coalition. We're lucky to have so many great organizations working with us on the fight against Dan Scammer. My name is Haley Carlock. I am Scenic Hudson's Director of Environmental Advocacy, and I'll be moderating tonight's program. First, before we get started, I just want to take care of a couple of quick housekeeping matters. We have 4 presenters today. And once they have finished, all of them have finished with their presentations, we will take questions at the end. But if you have a question that comes up anytime during the program, you can submit your questions via the little Q&A button that should be at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll get to them at the end of the program. If you're viewing the live stream on Facebook or on YouTube, we do have folks who are monitoring the chat there, and you can submit questions that way as well. In our previous webinars on this series, if you weren't able to view them, we heard from experts and community members about the impacts of fracked gas at the wellhead, where gas is extracted, and at pipelines and compressor stations along the way as gas is transported. And today our program will focus on the combustion of fracked gas at one of its final destinations, which is the new proposed Dan Scammer power plant in the town of Newburgh, right on the shores of the Hudson River. And you can view our previously recorded webinars at www.stoptheplant.org, and we'll have this one there as well within the next couple of days. And today you'll hear about what exactly is being proposed at the Dan Scammer site, how it will impact our warming climate and community health, and importantly, how you can take action to make sure that it never gets built. Okay, without further delay, I want to introduce our first speaker for today. If we can bring up the slideshow, please. Our first speaker is Raghu, is a staff attorney for Earth Justice. His work is focused on challenging proposed gas plants, primarily in state public utility commissions in the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, and Midwest. Prior to joining Earth Justice, Raghu was with the Eastern Environmental Law Center, where he represented nonprofit clients in a wide variety of New Jersey energy and environmental matters. Raghu began his career with the New Jersey Attorney General's Environmental Protection Group, representing the state in hundreds of cases of environmental enforcement litigation against polluters and regulated entities. So Raghu, take it away.
Thanks, Haley. I wanted to start by just going over a little bit about what my firm is doing in this case. My firm, Earth Justice, is a nationwide nonprofit law firm. We focus on environmental cases and energy cases. In this case, we're representing 2 organizations, that's Sierra Club and Orange Wrap. So today I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the new gas plant and that Dan Scammer Energy LLC is proposing to build, and what's going to be a part of that. In order to build the plant, Dan Scammer Energy LLC needs approval from the state's Board on Electric Generation Siting Environment. Dan Scammer has filed an application with that siting board, and my clients are challenging that application. Okay, so if we can go to the second slide. The Dan Scammer property is a 180-acre property. It's on the west bank of the Hudson River in the town of Newburgh in Orange County. Here's a map just to give you a better idea of the location we're talking about. On the next slide, you can see a picture of the area. Dan Scammer is currently operating a very old gas plant at this location. It was built in 1952. It runs very, very rarely. Dan Scammer is looking to replace that old plant with a much bigger, brand new gas plant that's going to run much more often. If you go to the next slide, here's another photo of the current plant from Scenic Hudson's website. And on the next slide, here's a mock-up of the proposed plant this is from the Dan Scammer website. So on the next slide, I want to show you a few differences between the current plant and the new proposed plant. The new plant's going to be over 100 megawatts larger than the current plant. As we said, the current plant runs barely at all. The new plant's going to run much more often. Danskammer expects it'll have a 70% expected capacity factor, whereas the current plant is less than 5%. One big difference is that the current plant is nearly 70 years old. We think it has a high likelihood of retiring soon, no matter what happens with this application. Danskammer calls the old plant a dinosaur. The new plant, if it's built in 2023, it would have a useful life stretching into the 2060s. It would be running for 40 years or longer. So that's what we're concerned about. On the next slide, we see the financing for this project is coming from a group called Tiger Infrastructure Partners. This is an investment fund with addresses in Manhattan, in London, in Luxembourg. These are the folks financing the project. So Danskammer needs about 2.5 years after they get siting board approval to actually get the plant online. And as we said, they want the plant online in 2023. So here's the siting board application timeline that Danskammer originally put together to make that 2023 date work. And what we did is we took that timeline and put it on a chart to compare it to what's actually happening here. The first 4 items on the timeline did go according to Danskammer's plan. The 5th item is where it sort of stopped. Danskammer was hoping to get this application filed in spring 2019. They did not get it filed until December 2019. At that point, another item that Danskammer did not include in their timeline, which is really important, is the siting board declaring the application complete. Until that happens, all the other things in this process can't start. So Danskammer was hoping to have these public hearings in the end of last year or the beginning of this year. That can't happen. Those can't be scheduled until the siting board says, Danskammer, your application is complete. That hasn't happened yet. So those public hearings are not scheduled yet. As far as the decision on this application, Danskammer wanted this case to be over already. They wanted the decision made in mid-2020. That's not going to happen until 1 year after the siting board determines the application is complete. One last thing I want to focus on in the previous slide, one last thing I want to say there is you're tuned in. The public hearings are important. Danskammer representatives and the hearing examiners are going to be there to answer questions from members of the public. Members of the public will be allowed to make a public statement on how they feel about the new plan. You're tuned into this webinar because you're concerned about the plan. If you have a statement to make on this, then I urge you to take advantage of the public hearing. Whenever that is scheduled, you'll have an opportunity to speak directly to the siting board about this. So now that I've gone through some of the basic information on the plan, I want to talk about some of the concerns that we have with the proposal. One item that we're concerned about is flooding at the site. Scenic Hudson has a terrific sea level rise mapper tool you can find on their website, and you can use to explore that. On the sea level rise mapper tool, here's the Danskammer site at current high tide. And here's the site during a 100-year flood. This is not a hypothetical situation. Hurricane Sandy flooded this site in 2012. It caused extensive damage to the plant and the plant was shut down for 2 years. So it's really important for us to understand, how will this site fare in the next storm? How will this site fare when sea levels rise? All of the flood maps in Danskammer's application, however, are pre-Sandy. So that's unfortunate because Hurricane Sandy changed our understanding of what types of flooding we face here. And it's important to reflect that in the flood maps. Another issue that I know a lot of folks are concerned about is whether this plant will burn fracked gas. And we feel confident that the evidence shows that it does. Danskammer's consultants report acknowledges in this chart that we took from their report that the plant will burn fracked gas from the Pennsylvania Marcellus region and from Canada. Danskammer's folks have acknowledged that 90% of the gas used in New York is fracked, and the gas used at this plant is going to be no different. So how much gas will this plant burn? One estimate of how much gas the proposed plant will burn comes from Danskammer's consultant. They estimate that if the new gas plant is built, the amount of gas burned in New York State power plants each year will increase by trillions of BTU per year. I've copied some figures from their report into this chart, and you can see the estimated annual increase in New York State gas use due to the Danskammer plant for 3 specific years. They calculated it for 2025, 2030, 2035. So what is going to be the consequence of burning all of that gas? Another pressing issue that folks close to the plant care about is air pollution. Danskammer's made a lot of claims about the new plant, that it's going to be cleaner than the old plant, and we need to listen carefully to those claims. Danskammer says the new plant is cleaner per megawatt hour than the current plant. And they're right about that. If you, per unit of energy that's created, the new plant is cleaner than the old plant. And when you're comparing a plant built in 2020 to a plant built in 1950, that is what you should expect. What's far more important here than just the efficiency is that the current plant runs less than 5% of the time. Dan Scammer estimates that the new plant is going to run much, much, much more often. It's going to run with a 70% capacity factor. So we put together some very rough preliminary calculations to try to understand the emissions we can expect to see from the plant. We tried to use the most conservative estimates possible. So this is the minimum emissions we expect to see with the new plant running at a 70% capacity factor. So as you can see from this chart, Newburgh and the Hudson Valley are going to see a very significant increase in air pollution from a number of different pollutants if this new plant is built. Another issue that lots of people across the state are concerned about is how will the new plant affect the state's CO2 emissions? And again, I want to look at some estimates from Dan Scammer's consultant. They estimate that if the new plant is built, the amount of direct carbon dioxide emissions from New York State power plants each year will increase by hundreds of thousands of tons per year. And again, here's their estimated increase for the specific 3 years of 2025, 2030, and 2035. Another issue, so that's the direct emissions from the plant. But when you're talking about a gas-fired power plant, direct emissions are just one part of the equation. We also need to look at the upstream greenhouse gas emissions involved with running this kind of plant. Upstream emissions include methane emissions and carbon dioxide emissions right at the point of extraction. Right when this gas is being fracked, there's going to be emissions. When gas is being transported in the pipelines from the extraction point to the power plant, there's going to be leaks in those pipelines, and there's going to be significant methane emissions there as well. We're looking at numbers here from Dan Scammer's consultant. They tell us that upstream emissions caused by the new plant will be in the ballpark of about 100,000 tons per year. So, with all of these emissions increases, you might be wondering, how does this plant fit with the new Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act? Here are the greenhouse gas emissions reductions requirements in the CLCPA. Earlier this year, the Citing Board read through Dan Scammer's application, and they told Dan Scammer, listen, your application is not complete until you can show us that this new gas plant is consistent with the greenhouse gas emissions reductions requirements in the CLCPA. Another part of the CLCPA that Dan Scammer has to comply with is the requirements specifically for the electric sector. Here we can see by 2030, 70% of the state's electricity must be supplied by renewable energy systems. By 2040, the state's entire electrical system must be zero emissions. So in July, in order to try and convince the Citing Board that the new gas plant would be consistent with the CLCPA, Dan Scammer submitted a report from a consultant. That report claimed that the plant might eventually be able to convert to burning renewable gas or hydrogen. You're going to hear a lot of proposals for new renewable gas and hydrogen projects going forward. And I think what's important to understand is there's no single way to create renewable gas or hydrogen. There's a variety of methods to do that. Some are good, some might have a positive climate impact, and some of them environmentalists might support. A lot of them are bad. A lot of them are going to create greenhouse gas impacts, and they're going to be really no better than burning fossil fuels. So when you hear about these renewable gas and hydrogen proposals, please keep in mind the details are really important. So after everyone had a chance to read this report from Dan Scammer's consultant, 5 parties filed a motion with the Citing Board. That's Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, Orange Rap, Riverkeeper, Scenic Hudson, and Sierra Club filed a motion. We told the Citing Board, listen, you can't rely on these claims about RNG and hydrogen. You can't rely on them because they are speculative, they are non-specific, they are non-committal, they are unenforceable, and they are incomplete. And we told the Citing Board, listen, either strike these claims from the record or require Dan Scammer to provide more information on exactly how they claim that they're going to use renewable gas or hydrogen. So last week, the Citing Board decided that we were right. The Dan Scammer application is still not complete. The Citing Board said, listen, Dan Scammer, your application is not complete and you need to answer 4 questions for us on renewable gas and hydrogen. First, they say the CLCPA has specific definitions for renewable resources. It has a specific definition for zero emissions resources. Will renewable gas or hydrogen actually meet those standards? We talked a bit about the different methods there are to create those fuels, and only very few of them, maybe if any, will meet those standards. So that's what they want to start with. Next, they ask, is renewable gas or hydrogen use actually feasible at this new plant? Can you show us that it's technically possible? Third, they ask, what additional costs are going to be necessary to bring this fuel to the plant and convert the plant to burn these fuels? There's going to be additional costs to do it, and there's going to be and the fuels themselves are going to be more expensive than regular fracked gas. The last question they ask is Danskammer willing to commit to pay the extra cost for the conversion and the extra cost for those more expensive fuels? So Danskammer is working on answering those questions. Until they answer the questions to the siting board's satisfaction, the application remains incomplete, and that's where we are.
Great, thank you so much, Raghu. I think that about covered all of the important issues of the plant, and I think it's really important to recognize that the emissions impacts of the plant that you went over so well in terms of the really significant increase we're expecting to see, and that Danskammer has essentially acknowledged in its application documents, will result in real impacts on the ground, particularly in Newburgh and here throughout the Hudson Valley, where we'll see the greatest impacts from the plant because it's located here, whether that's the climate impacts or whether that's, very real impacts to public health, which is what we're going to talk about next. So next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Larissa Dirkska, is going to be our next speaker. Dr. Dirkska has practiced general pediatrics and held the position of Director of Pediatrics at Holy Name Hospital in Teaneck, New Jersey. She is a founding member of Sullivan Area Citizens for Responsible Energy Development, and in addition, along with fellow medical colleagues, she founded the Concerned Health Professionals of New York and has been involved in the production of 6 editions of their compendium of scientific, medical, and media findings demonstrating risks and harms of fracking. She's also on the executive board of the organization Physicians for Social Responsibility New York, and currently serves on the Health Services Advisory Board of Sullivan County. So we're so pleased to have her here today. And with that, we'll hear more from Dr. Dirkska.
Thank you, Haley. So if we could have that next slide, please. Thank you, Carly. Hazardous air pollutants cause cancer and other serious problems. The Clean Air Act requires the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate these hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs, also known as air toxics, from industrial facilities by setting National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, for 6 criteria pollutants in outdoor air. NAAQS are currently set for carbon monoxide, lead, ground level ozone, nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and sulfur dioxide. The EPA issues rules to reduce these emissions from oil and natural gas production facilities, as well as natural gas transmission and storage facilities. Next slide. Stationary sources of air pollution include factories, refineries, boilers, and power plants, which emit a variety of air pollutants. The Clean Air Act directs EPA to control these emissions by developing and implementing standards and guidelines. The emissions from these various processes at oil and gas facilities and transmission and storage facilities typically contain these hazardous air pollutants, which include benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and mixed xylenes and hexane. Hazardous air pollutants are known or suspected to cause cancer or other serious health effects like birth defects or reproductive problems. And there are rules that guide these emissions, and they're called NESHAP, National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. We know that these toxic pollutants are emitted because companies that plan to build large stationary fossil fuel emitters have to submit applications for what's called operating permits. These are legally enforceable documents that clarify what facilities or sources have to do to control air pollution. It's required by Title V of the Clean Air Act, and they're issued to all major sources. Most are prepared or issued by state and local agencies, which is part of the Clean Air Act, Part 70. So who has to obtain this permit? Title V of the Clean Air Act requires major sources of air pollutants to obtain and operate in compliance with one of these Title V operating permits. The first step in determining if a facility is a major source is to determine the potential to emit, PTE, from all operations. And they have to list all of the pollutants that they may emit. And in the Raghu in the previous presentation just showed you some of the emissions that we're going to we should be prepared for from dance camera. The facility, if it emits more than 100 tons per year of any air pollutant or more than 10 tons per year of a single hazardous air pollutant, or over 25 tons per year of any combination of hazardous air pollutants. So if it meets one of those criteria, then the facility would be considered a major source and required to obtain a Title V operating permit. The facilities pictured here are the CPV power plant and dance camera, and they're in that category of a major source. Next slide. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and we have scientific evidence that air pollution has been linked to a higher number of COVID-19 deaths. The authors of this Harvard School of Public Health study from April this year found that an increase of only 1 microgram per meter cubed in particulate matter 2.5, which is just one of the hazardous air pollutants, is associated with an 8% increase in the COVID-19 death rate. Just this slight increase in pollution exposure has serious coronavirus-related consequences, even accounting for other factors like smoking and population density. Research also shows that communities of color are disproportionately impacted by air pollutants and more likely to face what's called a pollution burden. And the findings are particularly important for hospitals in poor neighborhoods and communities of color, which tend to be exposed to higher levels of pollution than affluent communities. And just this week, there was another article from the Harvard School of Public Health entitled "The Climate Crisis and COVID-19, a Major Threat to the Pandemic Response." So this is, right now, we're living in a confluence of two of our most pressing global health threats: the rapid emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic and the evolving climate crisis. And they disproportionately both of these harm the health of vulnerable and economically disadvantaged people, including those affected by structural racism. Understanding the challenges posed by this confluence is essential if we're to devise effective and equitable strategies to protect and improve health. Next slide. So let's look at the science. The body of scientific research on energy and environmental and health impacts has grown exponentially over the past 10 years. In 2009, there were essentially no peer-reviewed articles on health and oil and gas impacts. As of yesterday, there were 2,013 peer-reviewed articles in PSE for Healthy Energy's repository for oil and gas energy research. Next slide. Over 10 years ago, my New York health colleagues and I determined that a review of the environmental impacts of fracking without a thorough look at health was unacceptable. And we started compiling health literature that demonstrated the risks and harms of fracking. Eventually, it became a compendium, and we're now working on our 7th edition. Fortunately, the governor agreed that health required an in-depth review that only medical professionals could do, and tasked the Commissioner of Health to review all the health impacts of oil and gas, cradle to grave impacts. That review by the Commissioner of Health, Dr. Howard Zucker, demonstrated potential harmful health impacts, and New York State was not willing to take that risk. That led the governor to ban fracking. And following, I'll give you an inside look at the new compendiums section on power plants. Next slide. In this 2020 article, samples of water, sediment, soil, and biota were analyzed for concentration of potentially toxic trace metals, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, mercury, lead, and zinc, in a lagoon next to a gas and oil power plant in Lagos, Nigeria. They analyzed crabs and shrimp, which are ingested by the local population as an important food source, and which are ingested, and they found bioaccumulation of cadmium, lead, mercury, and zinc. Another pathway of exposure was via air, and it was believed to be responsible for chromium measured in soil samples near the plant. And since the concentration of arsenic, cadmium, chromium, and lead in the lagoon water decreased steadily with distance away from the plant, the authors concluded that their levels in the lagoon were influenced by operations of the power plant. So that one has to do with water. Next slide. Another article from 2020 looked at the effects of emissions on workers in natural gas-fired power plants. Air pollution is known to be strongly associated with morbidity and mortality from cardiorespiratory disease. There are also effects of air pollutants on inflammatory markers called, like, for example, C-reactive protein or CRP. So in this particular study, the authors looked at workers from this power plant in Nigeria also and matched them with healthy controls. They found an increase in the systolic blood pressure, the pulse rate, and the C-reactive protein levels in the workers compared to controls. And the longer the workers were employed there, the more abnormal were their results. Next slide. This is an older article from 2015 in which the authors assessed the associations between residential proximity to power plants and adverse birth outcomes like preterm delivery, very preterm delivery, and very low birth weight. They geocoded more than 400,000 Florida births and determined residential proximity to the nearest power plant for each birth. Prenatal exposure to particulate matter less than 2.5 in diameter, microns in diameter for women living near different types of power plants increased the odds of adverse birth outcomes among infants born to pregnant women living closest to the power plants. Next slide. These authors looked at 3 months worth of data to see if emissions from a gas-fired power plant correlated with emergency room visits and hospital admissions in elderly people living close to gas-fired power plants. They found that combustion of natural gas produced a rise in air concentration of particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide close to the plant, with a concentration-dependent increment of daily emergency visits and hospital admissions in elderly people. Next slide. The authors here used hospitalization data to examine whether living near a fuel-fired power plant increased the likelihood of hospitalization for respiratory disease. And after adjusting for variables, they found significant increases in the rates of hospitalization for asthma, an increase of 11%, acute respiratory infection 15%, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease 17% increase. Next slide. So this is a report, about a 300-page report that was commissioned by Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project and was written by Russo and Carpenter. Dr. Carpenter gave you the health impacts seminar some months ago. He's been studying this for many, many years. And here they looked at total releases of Title V compressor stations in New York State. And they compiled this data and found that 70 chemicals are released by New York State's natural gas compressor stations. And these are linked to all 17 of the major categories of human disease, as there is a classification of these in the 10th edition of a book called Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems. And those are summarized in this table. Most chemicals are known to cause, most of the chemicals that they looked at, that they studied, are known to cause multiple categories of diseases. Formaldehyde is a good example that shows releases. This compilation, the National Emissions Inventory, shows releases totaling approximately 1.3 million pounds of this particular chemical over the course of the years that they studied it. Formaldehyde is a human carcinogen. It's also included as a chemical associated with other neoplasms that are listed in classification category number 2. So if you look under category or chapter 2 under neoplasms, you'll find the number of emissions. You'll also see which chemicals contributed to it. So this is a systematically done study that looked at all of the emissions and what the possible health impacts could be, and it really affected all of the systems in the body. Next slide. The new dance camera plant would emit far more pollution than the existing plant, as has been mentioned, because in its regulatory filings, we know these pollutants include the volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, as well as greenhouse gas emissions, which are projected to increase by more than 4,000%. In this Lancet article, the authors state that climate change is a medical emergency. And the medical community agrees. In 2017, 11 medical societies, including the American College of Physicians and the American Academy of Pediatrics, joined forces to raise awareness about the harmful effects of climate change on the health of Americans. Next slide. So what can we do to protect yourselves? There's a group called Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project that has had more clinical experience taking care of people impacted by oil and gas activities than any other medical group. They have a website, and you can contact them if you need help. They give practical pieces of advice. So in addition to monitoring the air quality near your home, and you can do that, you can set up air monitors that will measure particulate matter or formaldehyde or VOCs outside your home and inside your home. But there are a few other ways to protect yourself from potentially harmful effects of air pollution, like using an air purifier. Avoid indoor air pollutants like dust, smoke, pesticides, air fresheners, and cleaning chemicals. Next slide. These will be available. These practical tips will be available to you. So I'm not going to read all of these. I'm just going to summarize them very briefly. Vacuum rather than sweep to reduce airborne particles. Make sure that all appliances like space heaters, ranges, furnaces, fireplaces are properly ventilated to the outside. Don't idle your car in an attached garage because those harmful fumes can enter your home. Keep your windows and doors closed and use an air conditioner if you have one, and especially in times that you perceive where the emissions might be particularly irritating. And pay attention to the weather, because this can be especially true if you live downwind and within a couple of miles of a source of pollution like a power plant. On days that are sunny with no wind, pollution can rise quickly. So it rises quickly and away from you, and it's less likely to affect your air quality. But on cloudy days with no wind, pollution stays closer to the ground and can result in unhealthy air. Next slide. There's a process which brings public health to the table and can inform land use decisions, and that can be used prior to the development of regulations and before permitting, and it's especially important. for oil and gas projects. The health impact assessment was developed by public health experts. It's recognized by the World Health Organizations and the National Academy of Sciences. And it's defined as you can see here, as a systematic process. It's very similar to environmental impact statement study that uses 5 steps, and it assesses the potential effects on health, the health impact assessment, I mean, the potential effects of a proposed policy plan or program on the health of a population, and the distribution. What's important is that it looks at the distribution of those effects within a population, and especially looking at vulnerable populations. Next slide. So a comprehensive health impact assessment was designed for precisely the kind of decision which the Citing Commission is currently weighing. It informs the decision makers on the impacts to health of this major land use decision. So my suggestion would be to ask the New York officials, just like they did in fracking, to join you in advocating on behalf of the most vulnerable to assure that social justice is achieved and that the health of the most vulnerable is protected, and that the relevant scientific information is in the hands of the decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Durska. That was so compelling and scary to hear about the health impacts of living near fossil fuel plants. And it's something that I think we're hearing more and more about now, but people don't often think about just what an impact that has on public and community health and what you're putting at risk for yourself and your family if you live near one of these facilities. And great advice about what you can do to help to mitigate that in your home. But it's really scary that we have to be thinking about doing these things because of things that we might not be able to directly control, like a fracked gas plant, just down the road or in your town. Well, thank you, Dr. Durska. Now we've heard from a lawyer and a doctor, and now we're going to switch to a community activist member who's got experience working on the ground with another power plant in the Hudson Valley that was recently constructed. And so our next speaker is Bill Kish, who is a software engineer and an environmental activist. He lives in Dutchess County, New York. He lives not far from the Cricket Valley Energy Center, which is one of New York's largest fracked gas electric generation plants. And that plant was just completed construction recently, is a very new plant. And Bill has devoted much of his time recently to fighting Cricket Valley via the groups Resist Cricket Valley Energy and TIAA Divest. And he'll talk a little bit about the community's experience with Cricket Valley and what we might expect from the Danskammer plant. All right, there you go, Bill.
Thanks, Haley. Okay, so bring up my first slide, please. And this is a cautionary tale. This is why it's important to take action early on Danskammer because of what happened in my community. Next slide, please. The Cricket Valley Energy Center was proposed in 2009 and approved in 2012 by New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation. This wasn't without controversy, but the Cricket Valley developers were very stealthy, and hardly anybody in the surrounding communities was really aware of what was planned until construction started in 2017. CVE, which is the acronym for Cricket Valley Energy, promised the residents of Dover, where the project was sited, quote, hundreds of well-paying jobs. They did an excellent job of splitting the community. On one side, there were residents who were hungry for economic opportunity, and on the other side, those worried about the health of their families. Next, please. CVE's 6 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions put New York State on a backward slide when the state's official policy is to have a carbon-free electric sector by 2040. It's obvious that politicians are hoping we won't notice the hypocrisy. The 6 million ton number is a conservative value. The methane that will leak from the Iroquois pipeline, an estimated 3%, is 85 times worse than CO2 in its global heating impact. So it's amazing to me, but I still run into people who live in towns surrounding CVE who claim that the plant isn't run on fracked gas. Advanced Energy, the company at the heart of Cricket Valley, did a very efficient job of greenwashing. They told the community that the gas powering the plant would be clean, green, and not fracked. The truth is that almost every methane molecule that fuels Cricket Valley is indeed from fracking wells. Next, please. So Dover, New York is where Cricket Valley Energy is sited. It's a beautiful wooded valley called the Harlem Valley. The Chattahoochee indigenous community has their home just to the east of this plant. 5 multi-generational farms and a growing number of new organic farms dot the landscape, and there are 3 schools in the immediate vicinity. Dover is an economically disadvantaged community. In fact, it's the poorest rural town in Dutchess County, bringing all of the health and other environmental justice issues to the front in our fight against CVE. Sadly, this is almost always the case. Threatened communities are selected as targets for dirty projects, and the project promoters promise economic benefits that never show up. CVE's developers receive tax advantages in exchange for the jobs that they promise to the community. CVE also gives $20,000 a year to the high school. This effectively silenced any objection from those whose job it is to protect our children. I doubt that $20,000 will actually pay for the asthma inhalers the school kids are likely to need. Next, please. And those hundreds of jobs I mentioned earlier, they were almost all workers from out of state working for Bechtel and other huge contractors. The few jobs that did appear were for low-paying, unskilled positions. Here's a photo of the parking lot where the workers parked their cars. Not a New York plate in sight. Next, please. In terms of ecological damage, Cricket Valley borders one of the largest freshwater wetlands in the state, called the Great Swamp. This vast, fragile wetland is a unique habitat for diverse wildlife, including rare and endangered animal and plant species. The Great Swamp helps humans too. It filters water, recharges the aquifer, provides flood control, and feeds New York City's drinking water system. As a global extinction crisis looms, Cricket Valley is threatening yet another habitat. Already under threat from global heating, the Great Swamp and the creatures who live there are unlikely to survive the onslaught from their new neighbor. Next, please. Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org and one of the top authorities in the climate fight, had this to say about Cricket Valley. If ever there was a bad plan, this was it. Bill's referring to the greenwash that CVE's owners use liberally to promote the idea that fracked methane gas is cleaner than the alternatives and should be considered as a bridge fuel. It's not cleaner just because the smoke isn't black, and as Bill said, it's a bridge to nowhere. When the plant was permitted in 2012, New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation allowed CVE to estimate its greenhouse emissions based on the 100-year global warming impact of methane. Today, they wouldn't have been allowed to do that, and a lawsuit was filed in 2019 demanding that DEC review the plant's application using up-to-date science. The lawsuit was dismissed in part because the plant had already been built. The lesson here is not to wait too long when you're fighting the fossil fuel industry. Next, please. The fight against Cricket Valley began in earnest in 2017, the year that construction began. Once the structure of the plant began to rise from the valley floor, local residents and environmental activists ramped up the fight. Cricket Valley knew that they were in a race to complete the plant before our voices reached those in power. We knew that Governor Cuomo had the power to stop the plant if the pressure was high enough. Next. In January 2019, local farmers blocked the road in protest to stop materials from being delivered to the then under construction plant. 3 were arrested by state police. Next, please. And last November, 4 protesters climbed to the top of CVE's almost completed smokestacks. They occupied this space for 12 cold hours, shutting plant construction down for the day. They too were jailed. And when the plant fired up in January 2020, the noise and smell from 3 new turbines shocked even those who thought the plant would provide benefit to the community. Several homeowners are suing the plant and others have moved out of the area. This is where we stand now. The plant is operating, the community is suffering. If there was one lesson we learned, it's that it's critical to organize early. If we'd had an organized effort to fight the plant in 2009 with the level of energy and commitment we attained 10 years later, this plant never would have been built. Next slide, please. So actually, the end of the slides.
Thanks so much, Bill. And I think that really is a cautionary tale. Obviously that's a different power plant, a different developer. So people may be wondering, why are you talking about this? But I think it's really important to take stock of what was promised to the community of Dover versus what actually panned out, and the mistruths and the greenwashing that the developer did were so similar to what we're hearing from Dan Scammer. It's not fracked gas. It's going to provide a lot of great local jobs. It's not going to have a negative impact on your community. All of the same things the Cricket Valley developer was saying to the town of Dover are what Dan Scammer is saying here. And one other quick thing I'll add is that the owners of Cricket Valley are actually vehemently opposing a proposed transmission line, which, why on earth would an electric generating plant oppose a transmission line? Because they think that they will not be able to run and make any money if these transmission lines are built to bring clean, renewable energy that there is an excess of in upstate New York to downstate New York. So, if anything can put to bed the myth that these plants are really needed, I think that should be it, that this plant that was just built is concerned about its viability if clean energy can get to the downstate market. All right, moving on to our final speaker today. Last but not least, we've got Emily Skydell, who is a longtime fracktivist and organizer, and she's currently serving as Food and Water Watch's Hudson Valley organizer for the Stop Dan Scammer campaign. She initially joined the movement back in 2012 at the height of the fracking ban fight while she was studying at SUNY Binghamton and living right there at the Marcellus Shale. She was born and raised in the Hudson Valley, so the Dan Scammer struggle is really close to home and personal for her. And she's going to talk a little bit about what you can do to get involved. Emily.
Great. Thank you so much, Haley. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for our speakers before me. We're so lucky to have so many amazing people that are involved in this fight, including everybody here. So how do we stop Dan Scammer? We've heard a lot about it. We've heard all the reasons why we need to stop it. So how do we actually do that? Well, ultimately, Governor Cuomo and the Public Service Commission, which is the government agency that he oversees, that they have the final say. So it's important that they know exactly where the public stands and that they get as much information in as possible so that the case is clearly made as to why this plant needs to be rejected. So Raghu went into the legal process of this, which is huge, and that piece is really the mechanism that that gets us to where we need to go in terms of winning in this campaign and in this fight. But there's another side of this too, and this is about getting public input, because out in the media and getting the attention of Governor Cuomo through activism, because ultimately a project like this, stopping a project like this, is a political move. If the public, especially the surrounding communities, are clearly speaking out against this and there is well-known opposition, the governor can and will make the decision to reject this application. And he knows he will have the support of the public and that it's a political move that he can take, that he will not only have the backing of voters, but that he'll actually win over more support of voters. So this means residents and elected leaders must speak out publicly. And that means they must be educated and well-informed on the issue. And that's why you are all so important to this. You as constituents can use the power of organizing and help get the word out and show just how dangerous this project is. So starting off, right, community education and outreach, that's a huge piece of fighting this. This is a photo that was taken before COVID, which shows our organizer Santosh out there with a clipboard, just talking to people in the city of Newburgh and educating them on what's going on there. Since COVID, we've held educational webinars like this one, empowering activists to pass local resolutions in their communities, empowering them to sign petitions, share petitions, write letters to the editor, write op-eds. Next slide. You can join us at monthly activist meetings. We've been having them now on Zoom. And one way that you can kind of stay in the loop on those is I'll share the name of our Facebook page later on, but usually we post all our meeting events on there. Next slide. So it's just another photo from one of our monthly meetings. Next slide. We also have rallies and protests. That's a photo from an action a year ago outside of Maloney's office. Recently, we had a rally and march in the city of Newburgh. We've been holding pickets outside of the office where the plant is located. Really, it's been amazing to watch the city of Newburgh and the surrounding area turn out for these protests. And it seems like every time we have a rally, lately they've been socially distanced, but they've gotten bigger and bigger because more and more people are realizing what's going on and they're taking action. Next slide. Just some more photos of different rallies and protests. That was before COVID, but next slide. More protest photos. Next slide, more protest photos. Next slide, we've got, this is from the first rally we had during COVID, after the quarantine lifted a little bit. The activists in the city of Newburgh, really led by the environmental justice community there from Nobody Leaves Mid-Hudson. We held a rally and march in the city of Newburgh, and this is Orange County legislator Kevin Darian Lujan speaking out. And this was right before they released 150 elected officials, released a sign-on letter to Governor Cuomo. Kevin Darian Lujan just penned an op-ed that was published today in the Times Herald Record talking about this more. So really getting our elected leaders to speak out publicly on this makes a huge difference in the fight. So moving on, next slide. 25 municipalities have passed Stop, Stand, Scammer resolutions so far. And this is really because local activists and community leaders have spearheaded this. They've pushed for this, going and making public comment at their local town board meetings, doing the legwork of educating the people in power that can vote on these resolutions. This takes the work of local activists like the folks on this call. So I really, I'm just so inspired by all the work that everybody has been doing on this. Next slide. So reach out directly if you're interested in finding out more about this process. Passing a local municipal resolution makes a huge impact. And there are already active resolution campaigns happening in Rockland County. There's a resolution that's been introduced in Woodstock as well, in Fishkill, in Westchester County. And this is the list of municipalities that have already passed resolutions. So if you are part of those fights, thank you. And it's amazing to see how this list is growing. And I'd love to connect and see how we can continue to work with you, even if even if your local municipality has already passed one. There are so many ways for you to join and engage in this fight, and we need you. So next slide. That being said, I wanted to just take a second to lay this out a little bit. The most important thing we can do right now is organize. So what does that mean? Educate your friends, neighbors, and colleagues on the issue. You can go to the stoptheplant.org website, a beautiful, beautiful website with amazing graphics, and it really just explains the issue in ways better than I ever could. So familiarize yourself with the issue, put it in your own words, pick out the key arguments. There's so many reasons why this power plant is wrong, and that it's bad for the Hudson Valley. And there might be something that really sticks out to you as important to talk about. And there are so many different actions you can take and that you can encourage others to take, whether it's signing a petition, which we have, and I will link to that in the chat. You can call Governor Cuomo, write down that phone number there, 888-925-7006, and voice your opposition. Join our coalition. Maybe Jess, if you could put the link in the chat for that too. Jess is doing a great job with the chat right now. Attend an upcoming rally or protest, submit a letter to the editor, whatever you want, however you want to take action, or however you choose to approach someone else to take action. I just want you to think about the fact that you have a lot of power in this, and that everyone here is an organizer. So I put in this little framework for how I normally write a rap or a speech when I'm organizing on this. But think about your intro, legitimization, problem, solution, action, how you talk about this. Why should they listen to you? Why is this important? And what are you trying to get from that person? What are you asking them to do? So there are so many different actions people can take and so many ways people can plug into this. Maybe you have a neighbor who used to be a journalist, or you know someone on your town board, or you want someone on your town board to write a letter to the editor. Figure out how you can push people to take action on this. So I'm just going to end, last slide, with actions. So these are the main actions, and we can open it up to Q&A. But sign the petition, call Governor Cuomo, join us at upcoming rallies, draft LTEs, and encourage others to do the same. And we're going to stop this. Thank you.
We are. Thank you, Emily, so much. And there are so many ways that that folks can take action. I know Jess has pasted in the chat the web address for stoptheplant.org. You can see a list of actions you can take, including a lot of the ones that Emily just talked about. You can join the coalition. I believe, again, Jess put that in the chat. If you're interested, if you're a member of a group or just an individual and you're interested in being a member of the Stop Dance Camera Coalition and working with, a lot of the groups that you're seeing here today to try to stop this plant, please sign up. It's a really important issue. And Emily is absolutely right when she says that the more people are getting involved and making their voices heard, it really does make a big difference. And it's just as important as sort of the legal process on the other side. All right, well, with that, I know we're nearing 6:30, but we do want to get to at least a few of our questions. So hopefully people can stay on for a few minutes because we've got some really good ones. All right, there is, the first question is that if the new plant isn't built, will they increase the output from the current plant? And I don't know, Raghu, if you want to take a shot at answering that one, because I know that's one of the things that Dan Skinner's been saying a lot, that they'll just run the old one more if the new one's not built.
Sure. I would say no. I don't think the old plant is going to run more just because the new plant is not built. Like we said earlier, the old plant is almost 70 years old. I think regardless of what happens with the new plant, I think it's very likely the old plant will be retired soon. So I think it's going to run less and actually shut down. I think that they're trying to scare you with the prospect of Indian Point closing. New York State has known that that plant will close for years and years. They put together an action plan to replace it. That action plan's in place, and they're confident that New York State's power system will be totally fine without Indian Point because of the investments that they've made since then in transmission and clean energy. New York NYISO's 2020 Gold Book has a great section on whether our electric system is stable with the current plants, and they think it is. They think it's very stable. So I don't think there's any reason to think that the old plant will run more. And that's a topic that we look forward to exploring more in the process. If the application is ever completed, we look forward to going through it, presenting our own testimony, and rebutting them very specifically on that.
Yeah, thank you, Raghu, and I totally agree. And in the process, Earth Justice's clients, as well as Sina Cutson, have hired experts to litigate exactly this issue. And I agree, it's totally false. It's sort of fear-mongering on the part of Dan Scammer, unfortunately. And you mentioned Indian Point. So there were a couple of questions from someone about, what's better, what's worse, Indian Point or Dan Scammer or fracked gas plants. And I think at this point, that's really a false choice because Indian Point is closing. One of the units has already closed. The other one is going to close. There's nothing that's going to bring them back. Certainly a lot of the litigation and the sort of political fallout from that plant may have had something to do with it, but it was primarily an economic decision on the part of Entergy. They've closed all of their nuclear plants in the Northeast. And so we're looking at the system as it is now. It's not a possibility that Indian Point would come back online regardless. So we had another question about the harmful health impacts. I liked this one, and this one I think would be best for Dr. Durska. Are the harmful health impacts that are being documented in vulnerable populations near power plants likely to be seen in the future in broader populations? That is, are the elderly people and neonates and children serving as the canaries in the coal mine?
I think it depends on what happens to pollution in the future. Are we going to be more like a coal mine all over, or are we going to breathe fresh air? Right now, we have COVID going on, but we have fresher air because cars are not polluting the highways, and people are really able to benefit from it. So I think we really have to see what happens, but it's pretty clear that what is happening to the vulnerable populations can also impact other populations. And COVID, doesn't seem to discriminate that much. If someone is impacted by COVID, they can also be impacted by these pollutants more readily, it seems. So, and vice versa. So I think this is it's a great unknown that what is going to happen in the future. Would be great if COVID went away and the pollution also stayed away. That would be the ideal, but I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Thanks, Dr. Durska. I think pretty much everyone can agree on those 2 points, that we wish COVID would go away and the pollution would go away. So I think we've got time for one last question. And this is another good one. What does the latest Public Service Commission Gold Book say about our need for more electric power generation? The CPV and CVE plants were built to compensate for the closure of Indian Point. Do we actually need them? So I think Raghu said that the latest is actually the New York Independent System Operators Gold Book. They run the electric grid, they make sure our electric service is reliable, and they've said time and time again that there's no need for additional generation. They consider the closure of Indian Point and other expected retirements, some of the peakers in New York City that are expected to retire. And they say our system looks stable and reliable for at least the next 10 years, which is just, that's just how far they look ahead into the future. And that's without a new Danskemmer plant. And there's been whole proceedings before the Public Service Commission about ensuring reliability post Indian Point. There's a ton of information out there about it. The state had been planning for this for a very long time. And actually the 2 power plants you mentioned in the question were not part of that plan. They're merchant plants, so they weren't sort of solicited to be part of the Indian Point solution. They are considered in the NYSO's analysis since they are already constructed and operating. But I don't think they're needed to replace Indian Point. And like I said, it's questionable whether the Cricket Valley plant will really be running at all and may end up being a stranded asset. All right, well, thank you everybody for attending, and especially to our great panelists. I think, we heard some amazing perspectives today. Hopefully everyone learned a lot. I know I learned a lot, even though I'm involved in this every day. I'm always learning a lot. And please take heed for what Emily said and the actions that you see on stoptheplant.org. There are lots of things that regular people can do, people that are concerned about fossil fuel generation, people that are concerned about the warming climate, people that are concerned about the health impacts of burning gas. There are lots of things you can do to speak out. And so use those resources, speak out against the plant, join the coalition if you'd like to. And we will send out a recording of the presentation within the next couple of days. So if you miss something, you can always look back and listen. All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a great night.